Okay, good morning. My name is Edward Shryane from RIPE NCC, working on the database team, and this is the, sorry, excuse me, just this. Better? Better, thank you. Okay, here's the operational update for the RIPE database. I'm here representing the database team, and thank you to the hard work and effort of my colleagues over the last couple of months that went into this update. Progress since the last RIPE meeting at the end of November. We've had 4 Whois releases. The first 2 releases were focused on RDAP improvements. RDAP is a more modern alternative to querying the RIPE database, and we feel it's important to keep up to date with draft standards that are coming along, and also to be compatible with the other RARs. So a range of improvements there, including improving the documentation, so it's easier to understand. Also, as pointed out in the address policy working group, we did not document maximum prefix size in the help text, so that's now fixed. We had a deadline of the beginning of April to comply with mail sender requirements from 2 big mail providers, and so we focused on that. 2 big features were to detect undeliverable addresses, and once we get a bounce, we no longer continue to try and send mail to those addresses. The second thing was to add email unsubscribe support. So this is giving the recipient of our emails an option to opt out and to unsubscribe. Given we had to comply with the mail sender requirements, there was a backlog of features which we then released in May. Quite a lot of changes. The headline was to deliver NWI4. So there's a new status called allocated assigned PA. The intention is that you can document one assignment that's the same size as your allocation, and we already have 3 of these objects as of this morning in the database. Another improvement was to add a character set flag. So now on the command line, if your terminal is UTF-8, you can specify UTF-8. Your response will be in UTF-8. And that is part of the preparation work for supporting UTF-8 across the database. Also, something that got a lot of support on the mailing list was to add support for querying for sponsoring org. It wasn't mentioned when sponsoring org was added, but we now support this feature, and a variety of other changes. There was one single outage in April. Operationally, we do update our packages regularly, and that means we need to rotate our master database. So we do regular switchovers. Also, it's good practice in case we ever have a failure. But in this case, there was a problem with the new master, that it wasn't accepting updates. We took 20 minutes to resolve that. The queries were unaffected, but it's something we really need to get to the bottom of, because since we're doing switchovers regularly, this needs to be very reliable. Statistics on various features that we've added recently. NWI 14, we've extended the M&T ref attribute to new object types. There's been only a modest take up of that, which seems to indicate it's not really a problem, but if you'd like to protect your objects from references from other objects, you can now use this mechanism to do that. Abuse C validation. There are 93,000 Abuse C addresses in the database. We're a little bit behind with our validation, because the registry services team has been very busy with billing. The first half, we are aware of it, we're keeping track of it, and we will be focusing more on validation. So by the end of the year, we will be have every Abuse C validation validated according to policy. The geofeed attribute is now there's now a purpose for geofeed in the RIPE database, And now use of GeoFeed is comfortably ahead of the workaround we had before using Remarks GeoFeed. So there's a good twice as many use of GeoFeed. So it's good to see there's good uptake. The non-auth cleanups, the non-auth database is continuing to shrink, but it's still slightly over 55,000 objects in there. And finally, synchronizing the LIR portal users to your default maintainer in the database. It makes the database easier to maintain, and nearly 2,000 LIRs have now opted into that. And going back to mail sender requirements, just to give you some more details on what we did. We really rely heavily on mail to notify users when updates have happened to the database. We have nearly 1 million distinct email addresses in there. So it's really important that we comply with these requirements to make sure that users do receive these notifications. So far, we have just over 1,000 addresses that we've detected as undeliverable. Almost about zero unsubscribed. I unsubscribed to test, and it's now gone back to zero. So that's a good vote of confidence. Nobody seems to want to have opted out of this process. So we feel the users who are receiving these emails see value in it, and they want to continue seeing them. One surprise with this was that outgoing volume was not really affected by these changes. We qualify as a bulk sender in the eyes of the mail providers. We're sending over 30,000 outgoing mails, but even after detecting these undeliverable addresses, the outgoing volume didn't really decrease, and we didn't get really a lot of complaints from our users. So it seems to have gone well, and we now have more data about, and it's now more accurate. We know more about these email addresses, but there is remaining work. I believe we are very dependent on these large mail providers to contact our users. The big three mail providers, Google, Yahoo, who impose these requirements, also Microsoft, they are hosting well over 300,000 of these 884,000 addresses. So if one of these mail providers decides that we're spamming their users, then we really could have a problem that there could be a lot of fallout. So should we investigate alternative notification methods? Maybe low volume, but for now, mail is the only option. Secondly, should we retry sending to undeliverable addresses? Now, generally, the failures we've gotten have been SMTP 500 errors, which indicate permanent failures. But is there an argument for going back? Since there is no mechanism right now for users to resubscribe themselves, since we anticipated the volume would be low, we planned that for now users would have to contact RIPE DBM, so registry services, and we will manually resubscribe them. So far, there's been absolutely no tickets, so that's really encouraging. So maybe that's a signal that we don't need to spend effort on this, but it's something we can improve. Operational work. So as you know, we're not just responsible for delivering features. We also operate the RDAP database and Whois, the Whois services. One thing that we've improved is separating client certificate authentication. We did turn it on our main REST API, but it's annoying if you follow a REST API link with this option on. TLS will ask the endpoint. The browser will then pop up a request to the user asking to choose a certificate. Since we want to accept any self-signed certificates, we can't scope that to just we're not issuing certificates for the RDAP database either. So this pop-up is very annoying. I don't think it's usable like that. So we switched to a separate service. If you choose to use client certificate authentication, use this well-known service name. Now it's in the documentation, REST-cert. And it was in my slides from the last meeting, but I've added an example to the documentation, how to create a self-signed certificate, how to sign an update, and how to use this REST-cert service to make an update. Secondly, in support of the company targets of the budget and consolidating our footprint in the data centers. We're consolidating our servers. We're looking at all of our the service for the database service. We have improved how we deploy. Every server is now identical, which is easier to maintain. We had a mix of old and new servers. We were keeping old servers as long as we could, but we had performance problems. We had inconsistencies between the response of the old servers and the new servers, and we felt that the mix of new servers that we had were quite adequate in delivering the service, so we're phasing out the old ones. And finally, we are continuing with our effort to containerize, which is going to be easier to deploy, test, operate our service. RDAP database documentation, a small thing. I mean, apart from documenting the new features we've been adding, we added a new separate service name for the documentation specifically. Since up to now, it's been a part of the web application, but there's really no need for that. We felt it needs to stand alone. It's Whois documentation, not just a web application. RDAP, we made some specific new features in RDAP. There is the RIR search, which is cross RIR efforts to add missing search features to the RDAP spec, specifically for numbers for the numbers databases. And one of those is to do basic search features. So you can now look for names. You can search for names more easily. And upcoming will be hierarchical searches. That's we're going to complete that next. We implemented a draft spec for geofeed, so you can now access geofeed information over RDAP. Something that was discussed in the mailing list, we're now we've re-added returning emails in entity responses. This is something that we count against the daily limit because it's considered personal data, but we didn't want to block our clients for excessively querying for personal data. We decided to remove it. Our users find it useful for it to be in there, so it's now returned for entity responses. It's not in there for resource requests, but it is in there for entity responses. So clients can choose to ask for it. And finally, something that came up in a previous RDAP meeting, somebody pointed out there's not enough detail in the README on the open issues and the differences with the RFCs and other RIRs. So we've been working on resolving that, also talking to the other RIRs and the draft co-authors on how we can improve compatibility. 2 numbered work items. We've implemented the new, as I mentioned, the new allocated assigned PA status. Allows LARs to register a single assignment, and there is a policy. There's an impact on policy. RIPE 82, the allocation and assignment policy, mentions the statuses by name, and we need to document this new status there also. So we'll be updating that separately. And secondly, compatibility change on our NRTM version 4 implementation. To be better standards compliant, we return a 404 rather than a 400 if a client requests an invalid path. So that's wrapped up all of the work that we've done. Now to talk about the upcoming changes. Big one is authentication. I think this got everybody's attention back in January. There was a security breach. It ended up affecting single sign-on, but it could just as easily have been the RIPE database. And we do need to start planning to phase out MD5 and look at how we use passwords in the RIPE database. And to be clear, I think this is going to affect batch updates, so non-interactive updates. I believe we have a good existing solution for interactive updates. It's single sign-on. We need to encourage people to stop using passwords interactively. Please use single sign-on. It's mature. It's been there for years. It's well supported. We need to focus on improving the story for non-interactive batch updates, which comprises the vast majority of updates for Whois. You want to update changes. but using MD5 in this day and age is a huge security risk. There's a risk on the RIPE-NCC if we have data breach or a bug to expose these hashes. There's a risk on our members, on our users. We have 20,000 maintainers with MD5 hashes. If that ever leaked, we have a data breach procedure, but there would be a lot of work for our support. We'd have to invalidate those hashes. All of our users, we'd have to reestablish who our maintainers are, reset their passwords. And in the meantime, there'll be disruption to the RIPE database because there'll be no updates. Also, we need to examine how passwords are used. It's possible to transmit passwords insecurely. For example, mail updates right now supports passwords. And mail updates, if it doesn't follow a secure path, you can end up on a mail spool somewhere or transport an insecure transport. So there's a risk of exposing passwords. And also, something to consider is that passwords are anonymous. They're not tied to a user. Maintainers can be shared. Maintainers are considered a role. You can have multiple people sharing that job. And in the end, you can't tell who's making a change if the password is shared. So we need to turn to looking at more secure methods of authenticating updates. 2 bullet points we already have. We've introduced client certificate authentication. So that's an alternative. There's no shared secret. You set up a key cert object with your key, and you can use that to authenticate changes. That's there. It's working. For a long time, also we have public key signed updates. So you can use PGP, for example, to sign updates and send it in using sync updates or mail updates. Admittedly, two drawbacks of those is that those methods is that it's difficult to set up and use. Password authentication is just very easy, so there'll be a story around migrating there. We also need to look at alternatives to the 2 methods we already have. Seeing as our single sign-on implementation is OAuth2 compatible, there are ways we can make use of that. There's an API, there are open standards there. One is to use the authorization code flow linked to your SSO account. You'll get an access key which you can refresh. Your batch script, for example, can refresh that. You use your access token for authentication, and you can refresh that periodically with a refresh token. Secondly, something that we'd like to suggest is to use API keys. This is something you can already do in the LIR portal, for example, but it's restricted to the LIR portal. We'd like to extend that to the RIPE database, and we feel it could be useful across all of the NCC services. So these things that we're talking about, not only for the RIPE database, but across other NCC services that we could have, we could find them useful there too, and for our users. So we'd like to put that forward, that we do need to urgently migrate away from MD5. There are alternatives there. There are standards compliant alternatives. But the migration is going to be difficult. We're all very used to using passwords over the last 20, 30 years of the database. So next steps, I believe, to publish an impact analysis as usual for any large changes. And we will ask for your guidance and your feedback. We depend on the community to let us know where we need to go next with this. Next up is a policy that's been approved recently, aggregated by LIR. This is a status that already exists for IPv6, for INET6 num, but not for IPv4. So this is now an option for IPv4. Use aggregated by LIR in a similar way to INET6 num. It's an accepted policy proposal. There's the RIPE document linked 822. We are now already implementing it. Implementation is in progress. There is going to be changes across a lot of our service. Status hierarchy is going to be similar to IPv6, and the assignment size will be there. We're adding assignment size to INET num, but it will be optional, and we're planning for deployment late next month. RDAP, as I've already mentioned, there are specific features we're planning to implement in the coming months. One is objects with administrative status are not returned. This is an edge case where we have delegated space that we've been given from IANA, but we're not allocating it. There isn't a lot of it, But what we're returning, I believe we're returning a 404, but we should be returning an administrator's block. Secondly, the RIR search. This is the second half of this RFC. We're going to add support for relation searches, so you'll have hierarchical queries like you have in Whois. And finally, my colleague in Aaron, Nasdip Singh, is working on a draft for bulk RDAP, which could be useful for our RDAP users. So you will get access to bulk data in RDAP format, similar to what we already provide for NRTM version 4. There's a draft available. So if you'd like to review and comment, I think that would be appreciated. NRTM version 4, the co-authors of this draft are at the meeting this week. We had a productive meeting earlier. We have a couple of remaining work items in the server implementation for the database team. First up is key rollover. The draft gives us a year to implement a rollover, but we do need to do that since it's now been in production for about a year. So this is a feature we need to do soon. Secondly, we discovered there's a signature erase condition. You can download the update notifications to tell you what's changed, but then you need to go make a second request for the signature to validate that. And in between those two steps, it's possible for there to be a race condition. And Sasha pointed out this can happen multiple times a day depending on when the client has started. So it can happen. It's not a rare event. So it's something we need to fix. We need to improve the documentation. For now, since the draft has been it's been a draft, and there hasn't been a lot of deployment, but this needs to change. And one way we can improve adoption is to improve the documentation. So we need to, especially our implementation of it, we need to get the word out and to describe fully how our implementation works and how to find it. And lastly, to help with the draft adoption, it's just good practice to have multiple clients. So RAPNCC is going to work on a client-side implementation for NRTM version 4. Also, it'll help to go through the draft text again, helpful to have more eyes on the implementation side to see if we've missed anything, if the documentation draft needs to be improved. And hopefully it'll be useful for the community. I mean, I know the NRTM version 3 client that we have in Whois does get some use. Something that's been left over since before RIPE 87 are cleaning up remarks attributes. There were 2 projects from over 20 years ago now, but there are traces of these remarks. These projects still live on in the RIPE database, and I believe the time has come to clean it up. So the plan is to remove these remarks. We've already done it for two other projects, and as usual, we will be notifying the working group and getting into contact with maintainers before we make any changes. So we will be announcing that later. An ongoing effort, I believe it's one of the numbered work items, is to implement support for UTF-8. And as I've mentioned, we now have a flag for specifying the character set. We do already support UTF-8 in the web application and in a REST API, but there are other APIs relied on by a lot of our community, excuse me, that are still Latin 1. So we proposed an impact analysis earlier this year on how we could migrate to UTF-8 in 3 phases. First phase is to add a flag. So you can already make use of UTF-8 on the command line. And in future, if we ever change the default, it means you can change back to the current legacy behavior. Phase 2 would be to convert the database schema to UTF-8. There will be no user-facing changes, but it means that we can start using UTF-8 internally. And as a final phase, we would then also store UTF-8 in the RPSL objects. So, and again, we would not have any change to the user-facing functionality, but it would modernize the underpinnings, our application and the database that we can start using UTF-8 internally. But it does depend on a future decision by the working group. Where do we want to allow UTF-8? Do we want to change any of our interfaces? Port 43, our dump files, NRTM, all these interfaces are still Latin 1, and we will not change anything without strong support from the community. So it's in your hands. So Would appreciate some feedback. I'm not sure what next steps are. Thank you, William, to move forwards with this. A small feature that we've added, we want to integrate with our PKI. We want to see, we have there are some scenarios where Route 6 objects can conflict with Whois. We have implemented for single Whois, but we do need to also take into account overlapping Whois. That's a common case where you have one intersecting row which is valid, one which is invalid, matching the route object. So that needs to be implemented. It will be in the next Whois release at the end of next month, and we will turn it on in our web application and REST API. Missing history, something I mentioned before, but it bears repeating. We have some gaps in our database that we'd like to fix. It affects old data, but yeah, with something that affects version history queries, both our internal staff stumble over this because the version history is can be broken. External users, you don't have the full picture of old data. Also, it affects Whois code because we need workarounds, and database structure is affected. There are gaps, so we want to fix this. We do have the full history in our update logs and the internal resource registry going back to the very beginning. But we want to backfill this information into the right database, so we have a consistent view of our own history. Retiring ns.net. Martin is here. I think there he is. Thank you. Martin mentioned this yesterday at the DNS working group. We are retiring the ns.net service. If you know what it is, there's some information there. And yeah, but I think it bears repeating because there's an impact on the database working group as well. So if you're affected, please share your feedback on the DNS working group. Using the cloud, I think this is my last slide. Some news on the cloud. We are going to stop the cloud consultation proposal. We believe that without strong support from the community on bringing this forward, that it's better to stop the effort to migrate the RIPE database to the cloud. We are taking RIPE community feedback into account, especially concerns around vendor lock-in, personal data. All of that. Also, the negative reaction to the SCIDN domain registry proposal in February, that really didn't help. So we don't feel there's strong enough support to move forward. So we will instead focus on improving our on-premise environment. The RIPE database and all of the data will remain on-premise. That said, I wouldn't like to close the door completely on the cloud, and I think there's a place for it, but we need to be careful. I mean, there are things that will benefit from a cloud deployment, or at least using a CDN. The NRTM version 4, for example, that we're using has very, very big daily snapshots. RDAP returns large JSON responses, and the APNIC RIR have already migrated RDAP to the cloud. They see benefit in doing that. But for now, to reiterate, we will not make any more effort on our cloud proposal. I believe that's it. Thank you, and hopefully I'm still under time. If there's any questions, thank you. Leo.
Hi, Leo Vagoda, and Polis, and PeeringDB. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing on UTF-8. It's definitely the right thing to do. I think this is in support of the accuracy goal. We have countries in this service region using Cyrillic, Arabic, Hebrew, Georgian, and maybe other writing systems, I don't know. If we can accurately reflect them in the database, that is the right thing to do. Your plan looks sort of right. I'm not going to micromanage it, but I have a request. You started off talking about RDAP. I know that RDAP is not fully supported for all internet number resources. It would be great if you could do some kind of transparency report. I don't think it's actually the RIPE NCC that has the issues. So this is you with your NRO hat on. Mm-hmm. But it would be really helpful for people that rely on RDAP to know this is the gap, this is where the gap is, and maybe these are the plans, because if you have to fall back to Whois, you normally have to fall back to a manual process, And this week we've even seen instances where you have to fall back to Whois. And that means you've got 3 different things, and you've got to know to do the right kind of query depending on the resource. So I'm not saying please go and fix the problem, but it would be great if you could start with a transparency report, and then we can think about how we can turn off at least our Whois.
Yes, thank you, Leo. That's a great point, and I completely agree with you. RDAP traffic has been about 5% of query traffic for years now, and it isn't really getting any more adoption. I can see RDAP is the future of Whois. It's cross RAR, and there's been, but it is the it's missing a lot of features, especially the IRR, and we've been making efforts on filling gaps elsewhere, like the RAR search feature. There's been other draft proposals as well, but I think the way forward is to create a draft for missing features, especially IRR, the IRR database, and as you said, create a report on where the gaps are and where we can fill it in.
I'm thinking initially just these are the proportion of resources that can't even be queried.
Okay.
So I know that there's a feature gap, but I'm not really thinking about the feature gap. I'm just thinking, like with my PeeringDB hat on, if someone requests a registration in PeeringDB and they have an AS number which doesn't have an RDAP listing, we have to fall back to a manual process. And so, you know, we've had conversations with RARs about this, and I know that RARs want to work on it, but just defining this is the scale of the gap for the proportion of different internet number resources, AS numbers, IPv6, IPv4, these are the parts of the world affected, whatever it is, the right measurements that you will understand, and you'll put the right measurements in that report. That would be super helpful. And then we've got something to go off, and we can grow that 5% to more than 50 at least.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you.
Peter Hessler, member of the working group for the next 2 to 3 minutes. I just wanted to comment quickly on UTF-8 to follow up on what Lee was saying. I did a very quick Google search during your talk and found that apparently LACNIC is returning UTF-8 objects in Whois on port 43 right now. And I was curious if you looked at the wider ecosystem of the major Whois providers, who else is already providing this, and if you haven't, I would recommend that we take a look.
Yes, I have done that. I've looked at all the IRs, and I don't want to name names, but most of them do not return UTF-8, at least not yet. Most of them are still Latin 1, surprisingly, given the different regions and the amount of languages and scripts. And our community, our very wide community, who don't necessarily have use Latin 1 script day to day. So,
but there's at least one who does, or
most of them are still Latin 1. I can share with you separately, but
okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to share that even though there might be databases or other Whois providers who already do UTF-8, the tricky thing is that generally the char set will be hard-coded in the Whois clients, as there's no way to communicate that. So you have to communicate it out of band and hard-code it in the client. So even though LACNIC might do it, and a Whois client might support that, it might not support RIPE doing it immediately. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions, I'll end at that. Thank you.